The weight of the pearls felt like a chain around her neck. Each one was a perfect, luminous sphere, a gift from her future mother-in-law, and Amara hated them. They were cold against her skin, a constant reminder of the life she had agreed to, the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle. From the antechamber, she could hear the string quartet, a delicate, hopeful melody that felt like a lie. Her dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, a cloud of white that was supposed to represent purity, a new beginning. To Amara, it was a shroud. It was the costume for the final act of a play where she had forgotten her lines and lost the plot. She had spent the last 6 months playing the part of Amara Clark, the sensible, graceful fiancée of David Sterling, heir to a real estate empire. A safe choice.
A logical alliance.
A slow, quiet death. Her fingers, trembling inside satin gloves, clutched the small, cold rectangle of her phone. It was a contraband object, smuggled in by a sympathetic bridesmaid who thought she needed it for last-minute selfies. Amara needed it for a resurrection. Or a demolition. She wasn't sure which. Her thumb hovered over the contact name. Just one name, Kwan. No first name, no title. Just the one syllable that had dismantled her world and then vanished from it. For 6 months, she had stared at that name, her finger tracing the letters on the screen, the ghost of a memory. He had made her a promise. A brutal, devastating promise to stay away, to let her live a normal life, a safe life. He had called it a gift. She had called it an amputation. She had accepted it. She had grieved him as if he were dead, because in her world, he was. She had met David. She had said yes. She had picked out flowers and tasted cakes and smiled until her face ached. She had done everything she was supposed to do, built a fortress of propriety around the hollow space Kwon Ji-hoon had left inside her. Now, the walls were about to come down. Her thumb pressed down. The screen lit up with their last, stark exchange. It's better this way, Amara.
Forget me.
I can't. That had been 6 months ago. An eternity. He hadn't replied then, and he hadn't reached out since. He had kept his word with the same surgical precision he applied to everything else in his life. He had cut her out. She typed the new message, the words feeling alien and powerful, a spell she was casting into the void. Each letter was a betrayal of the man waiting for her, a betrayal of the life everyone expected her to want. If you still want me, come get me. She added the address of the church. And then the final twist of the knife, the detail that would either be his reason or his excuse. You have 2 hours. Her finger hovered over the send button. This was the precipice. Sending it meant setting fire to the safe, predictable future she had so carefully constructed. It was an invitation for chaos to walk back into her life, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying the scent of sandalwood and smoke. Not sending it meant walking down that aisle saying I do, and spending the rest of her life wondering what if. She had never been a woman who could live with what if. She pressed send. The message vanished into the ether. For a moment, nothing happened. The string quartet continued its gentle serenade. Her father knocked softly on the door. 5 minutes, sweetheart. I'll be right there, she called out, her voice miraculously steady. Then, the phone vibrated in her hand. A single gray checkmark turned blue.
Read.
Amara's breath hitched. She stared at the screen, at the damning, hopeful little word. He had seen it. Somewhere across the city, in a world of steel and shadows she had only ever glimpsed, Kwon Ji-hoon had read her final, desperate plea. She slipped the phone back into her bridesmaid's purse, the cold glass now feeling warm against her palm. She stood, the silk of her dress rustling around her ankles. She looked at her reflection in the tall, gilded mirror. A beautiful bride, a perfect picture of happiness, a complete and utter fraud. 2 hours. The clock had started. Now, all she could do was walk toward one life and pray another one came to claim her. The whiskey was the color of dark honey in the crystal glass. Kwon Ji-hoon swirled it, watching the liquid catch the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city sprawled below him, a kingdom of concrete and ambition he had carved out for himself with blood and discipline. He was the master of this domain, his control absolute, his power unquestioned. He was also completely, utterly alone. It was a solitude of his own making, a necessary fortress. Attachments were liabilities. Emotions were weaknesses to be exploited by his enemies. He had learned that lesson the hard way, in a hail of gunfire that had stolen the life of a woman named Minacio, a woman he had been foolish enough to love. Her ghost was a permanent resident in this silent, opulent apartment. Her memory was the wound that never healed, the reason he had built his walls so high. Then Amara had walked into his life. A translator for a business deal, she had been an unforeseen complication. She was sharp, observant, and possessed a stillness under pressure that he recognized because it mirrored his own. She saw things she wasn't supposed to see, understood the violence that simmered just beneath the surface of his polished corporate facade. She should have been afraid. She wasn't. And that had terrified him more than any rival. So he had pushed her away. He had severed the connection with the same brutal efficiency he used to eliminate a threat, telling himself it was for her own good. He was poison, a walking catastrophe, and she was a life that deserved to be untouched by his world. He had watched from a distance as she moved on, as she met David Sterling, as the engagement was announced. Each news clipping felt like a turn of the knife, a confirmation that he had done the right thing, the honorable thing, and it was destroying him. His phone vibrated on the marble countertop, a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet room. He ignored it. It would be his lieutenant, Jay, with a report on the port situation. It could wait. It vibrated again, persistent. With a sigh of irritation, he set down his glass and picked up the device. The screen was lit with a name that made the air leave his lungs.
Amara.
His thumb unlocked the phone before his mind could process the implications. And then he saw the words. If you still want me, come get me. The address. The 2-hour deadline. The glass he'd been holding slipped from his other hand, shattering on the polished floor. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look down. His entire universe had just contracted to the glowing screen in his hand. It was a trap. It had to be. Sterling's family was powerful, old money with deep political connections. They would know who he was. This could be an ambush, a public execution designed to dismantle his empire. But the words, if you still want me, it wasn't a demand. It was a question.
It was a plea wrapped in a challenge.
It was Amara. Her voice, her courage, her impossible, stubborn heart. He remembered the last time he had seen her. The sterile quiet of a coffee shop he had chosen for its lack of ambience, its perfect neutrality. He had laid out the reasons they could not be together, a logical, cold dissection of their impossible reality. He had watched the light in her eyes flicker and dim, but she had not cried. She had simply nodded, her dignity a shield he could not penetrate. I understand, she had said, her voice perfectly even. Be safe, Ji-hoon. She had never called him by his first name before. In that moment, it had felt more intimate than any touch, and more painful than any wound. Now this reckless, insane gamble. Boss. Jay stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes were fixed on the broken glass at Ji-hoon's feet. Ji-hoon didn't look at him. He was still staring at the phone at her words. He could feel the ghost of Minacio whispering in his ear, reminding him of the cost of love in his world. You failed me. You will fail her, too. The brokenness inside him, the hollowed-out space that he filled with power and control, ached. He had let Amara go because he was afraid of failing her. But what if letting her marry another man, a man she didn't love, was the bigger failure? What if safety was just a prettier cage? He thought of her face, the way a small smile would touch her lips when she thought he wasn't looking. He thought of the scent of her hair, something like rain and clean cotton. He thought of the intelligence in her eyes, a fire that no one, especially not a man like David Sterling, would ever truly appreciate. If you still want me. It wasn't about want. It had never been about want. It was about necessity. She was the one person who saw the man behind the monster and wasn't afraid. She was the only thing that had felt real in a life built on illusions of power. He looked at Jay, his decision hardening into something cold and absolute. The hesitation, the fear, it all burned away, leaving only a core of lethal certainty. He had made a mistake 6 months ago, a mistake born of grief and fear. He would not make it again. "Get the cars," Ji-hoon said, his voice quiet, devoid of all emotion. "And the men." Jay's eyes widened fractionally. "Sir? The Sterling wedding? It's a hornet's nest. Their security is top tier. It's an invitation," Ji-hoon finished. He slid the phone into the pocket of his Tom Ford suit jacket, the movement smooth and deliberate. He walked past the broken glass without a glance, his stride purposeful. He was no longer a man paralyzed by his past. He was a predator who had been given a target. "We're going to a wedding." The aisle felt a mile long. Amara's arm was looped through her father's, his grip tight and reassuring. He was beaming, proud of the match she had made, proud of the secure future she had chosen. She felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, stabbing regret for what she was about to do to him, to her family. But the regret was a distant echo compared to the roaring silence in her own heart. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar, on the profusion of white lilies and roses that filled the air with a cloyingly sweet scent. She could see David waiting, handsome in his tuxedo, a confident smile on his face. He was a good man in his own way. He was stable, kind enough, and he would give her a life of comfort and predictability. He would never understand the part of her that craved the storm. With every step, her hope dwindled. The church was filled with the city's elite, a sea of polite smiles and expensive jewelry. There were no shadows here, no place for a man like Kwon Ji-hoon to hide. The heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary were closed. He wasn't coming. The message had been a moment of madness, a final flare sent up from a sinking ship. He had read it and done the sensible thing, the thing he had promised to do. He had forgotten her. The disappointment was a physical thing, a cold weight settling in her chest. She had been a fool. She had mistaken a dangerous obsession for something more, and now she was going to pay the price by living a life that was half alive. Her father placed her hand in David's. David's skin was smooth and warm, his grip gentle. He smiled at her, his eyes full of adoration. "You look beautiful," he whispered. Amara forced a smile back, her facial muscles feeling stiff and unfamiliar. "Thank you." The officiant began to speak, the words washing over her, meaningless pleasantries about love and union. She was only half listening, her senses on high alert, straining for any sound, any sign that she had not been abandoned. There was nothing, just the drone of the officiant's voice and the rustle of clothing from the pews. It was over. She had made her choice 6 months ago, and again when she'd said yes to David. The text was nothing. A final, foolish dream. She had to face her reality. She had to say the words. "If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," the officiant intoned, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." A beat of silence. The traditional, pregnant pause. And then a sound. A deep, resonant thud as the heavy oak doors at the back of the church were pushed open. A collective gasp swept through the congregation. Heads turned. The string quartet, which had been playing softly, faltered and fell silent. The air in the room changed, the temperature seeming to drop by several degrees. Amara's heart stopped. She knew, even before she looked. She knew that scent of sandalwood and cold ambition that seemed to precede him. She turned slowly. And there he was. Kwon Ji-hoon stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure of impossible stillness against the bright afternoon light. He wore a black suit, so exquisitely tailored it seemed a part of him. He was flanked by 2 of his men, but they were peripheral, mere extensions of his will. His presence alone was enough to hold the entire room captive. It was not loud or aggressive. It was the absolute, predatory calm of an apex predator that has just entered a room full of prey. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the crowd for a fraction of a second before finding hers. They locked on her, and the rest of the world fell away. There was no church, no groom, no family. There was only the silent, violent pull between them, a gravity that had been denied for too long. In his gaze, she saw no apology, no hesitation. She saw only a question, the same one she had asked him. "Do you still want me?" David stiffened beside her, his hand tightening on hers. "What is this? Who is that?" he hissed, his voice a mixture of confusion and outrage. Amara didn't answer. She couldn't. She was caught in the intensity of Ji-hoon's stare. This was the moment. The choice was no longer a hypothetical text message. It was a man standing 10 yards away, a man who had broken his own rules to come for her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Guests were whispering, a nervous murmur rippling through the pews. David's father, a formidable man with a granite jaw, was already signaling to his security guards stationed discreetly along the walls. Ji-hoon took a step forward, then another. He moved like the room owed him space, each step deliberate and soundless on the marble floor. He was not rushing. He was claiming territory. "Security," David finally shouted, his voice cracking. "Get him out of here." The guards started to move, converging on the aisle. But Ji-hoon's men stepped forward, blocking their path. There was no visible display of weapons, just a shift in posture, a subtle squaring of shoulders that promised swift, brutal consequences. The professional security guards, trained to handle drunk wedding crashers, hesitated. They recognized that they were out of their league. This was something else entirely. Ji-hoon never took his eyes off Amara. He continued his slow, inexorable walk down the aisle, a specter of her other life coming to reclaim her. David, panicked and humiliated, turned to her, his face flushed with anger. "Amara, who is he? Tell me what's going on." This was her moment of agency. She could shrink behind David, let this play out as a fight between two powerful men over a prize. Or she could own her choice. She had summoned him. She had to meet him halfway. She gently pulled her hand from David's grasp. "I can't marry you, David," she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying in the unnatural hush of the church. A wounded, incredulous look crossed his face.
"What?"
"You can't because of him?" He gestured wildly toward the approaching figure. "He's a criminal, Amara. A gangster.
My father told me about him."
"I told you to stay away from that world." So, they knew. They had investigated him. They had tried to protect their investment. She looked at David, at his handsome, bewildered face, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. He wasn't a bad man. He was just the wrong man. He wanted the woman in the white dress, the polished, presentable wife. He would never want the woman who would text a mafia boss on her wedding day. "I'm sorry," she said. And she was. Sorry for the hurt, sorry for the public humiliation. But she was not sorry for the choice. She took a step away from the altar, lifting the heavy silk of her dress with one hand. She was no longer a bride. She was a woman walking toward her destiny, whatever it might be. Ji-hoon stopped a few feet from her. The space between them crackled with everything left unsaid for 6 long months. She could see the faint, silvery line of a scar near his temple, a detail she had once traced with her fingertip in the quiet of his apartment. His face was a mask of cold control, but his eyes were burning. "You came," she whispered, the words for him alone. "You called," he replied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. It was then that David, pushed past the point of reason, lunged for her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "You're not going anywhere. You are making a fool of me." Before Ji-hoon could react, Amara did. Her survival instincts, honed by her time in his world, took over. She didn't struggle.
She didn't pull away.
She leaned in close to David, her face inches from his, and did something she never thought herself capable of. She used the knowledge she had of him, the intimate secrets of a fiancé, as a weapon. "Let go of me, David. she said, her voice a deadly calm whisper. Or, I will tell your father about the Cayman account. The one you opened last month. The one you've been using to siphon money from the Phoenix Project. The color drained from his face. His grip went slack. The public humiliation was one thing. The threat of his father's wrath was another. He stared at her, not with love or anger, but with the dawning horror of a man who realizes he has completely misjudged the woman he was about to marry. He had seen a prize. He had never seen the steel beneath. In that instant of shocked silence, Ji-hoon closed the final gap between them. He didn't touch David. He simply placed his hand on the small of Amara's back, a gesture of quiet, absolute possession. The warmth of his palm seeped through the thin silk of her dress, a jolt of electricity that grounded her. He looked down at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "It's time to go," he said. She nodded, a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees. She had set the world on fire, and he had walked through the flames to get to her. He turned, his arm protectively around her, and began to lead her back down the aisle, away from the altar, away from the life she was supposed to live. The guests stared, mouths agape, a tableau of shock and scandal. David's father was shouting now, his face purple with rage, but Ji-hoon's men formed a silent, immovable barrier. As they walked, Amara's white train trailed behind them on the marble floor, a stark symbol of the life she was leaving in her wake. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, condemning her. But the only thing that mattered was the steady presence of the man beside her, the solid feel of his body against hers. They reached the doors and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. A fleet of black SUVs was parked at the curb, engines humming. One of his men opened the rear door of the lead vehicle. Ji-hoon helped her inside, his touch gentle on her elbow as she navigated the voluminous dress. He slid in beside her, and the heavy door slammed shut, encasing them in a cocoon of tinted glass and cool leather. The world outside, the shouts, the pointing fingers, the furious face of David Sterling, was instantly muted, reduced to a silent film. The SUV pulled away from the curb with a smooth, powerful surge of acceleration. Inside, the silence was deafening. Amara sat amidst the ruins of her wedding day, a bride with no groom, in a getaway car. She looked down at her hands, still clad in their pristine white gloves. She slowly began to pull one off, finger by finger. "You're bleeding," Ji-hoon said, his voice quiet. She looked up. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her arm, where David had grabbed her. For faint red marks were already blooming on her skin, the beginning of bruises. Without a word, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. He gently, almost reverently, lifted her arm and brushed his thumb over the marks, his touch so light it was barely there. It was not a gesture of passion. It was something more profound. It was an acknowledgement of the price, a silent promise of protection. She watched his face, the hard lines of his jaw, the unyielding set of his mouth. He was a dangerous man. He was chaos and violence and everything she should have run from. Her life would never be safe with him. It would never be simple or easy. But it would be real. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kwon Ji-hoon finally lifted his gaze from her arm to meet hers. The cold mask was gone, and for the first time in 6 months, she saw the man beneath, the broken, guarded man who had just risked everything to answer her call.
"Home," he said.
And as the city streaked by, a blur of forgotten possibilities, Amara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window and knew, with absolute certainty, that she already was. The white dress was a lie, but the man holding her hand was the only truth she had ever needed.